All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session on ESET and the Ocean Decade, efforts and opportunities to engage. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to all the presenters in the session today. Carolina for helping out coordinate. We have Steve Diggs from the University of California, Frank Mueller-Carger from the University of South Florida, and Kate Rose from NOAA's NCEI. And this is all brought to you by the ESET Marine Data Cluster. I do have you can't see that in the room. I do have a tiny URL link and a QR code to the notes document. And within the notes document, you'll have links to all the slides and everything, which we will be referencing during the presentation. So it'd behoove you to take a look at that. Okay, so what are we talking about today on this session? So this, I have to admit a little bit, this is kind of self-serving. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the Ocean Decade, as I don't know much about it, but I've heard it murmured in various rooms. And so really, I wanted to learn what is it? And I figured if I had the question about what is it, then other people might have a question about it. So I did want to do a little crowdsourcing, and how many people have heard of or know about the Ocean Decade within? Okay, so I think I'm hitting the right audience here. So we wanted to do a little introduction on what is the Ocean Decade, do an overview of some projects and some proposed projects and programs, and then look at ways that the ESET community can engage with this effort. So some of the goals for today is to, again, inform participants of what the Ocean Decade is, look for places that we might leverage our efforts, and then look for possible cross collaborations, even outside of marine data, looking at other disciplines. And then we also want to look for places that the Marine Data Cluster can actually facilitate some of those conversations and some of those collaborations. So we're really kind of looking for advice on where we can take this effort. And so what we'll be going through today is the welcome that I'm doing right now, an introduction into the Ocean Decade from Steve, and then some current Ocean Decade programs, proposed projects from Frank and Kate. And then we're going to get into small groups and kind of work through some ideas as to how ESET can engage with this decade effort, and then do a little bit of wrap up and close. So first and foremost, I will start off with Steve on the Ocean Decade overview. So Steve, if you want to come on up. Just gotta switch the screen. You share. Oh no, we're doing, stand by. I got it. There we go. Okay, thank you.
And slide advance is
Just the arrow.
Oh.
I was using this arrow.
Oh.
Block the top, go away, the black box.
The transcript,
Yeah.
is that good?
in every crowd, somebody asked the same question. Hi, my name is Steve Diggs. I'm with the University of California. I'm a senior research data specialist for what all those things that mean. And hello at home, people. Welcome as well. So I may have the first slide deck on what the UN Ocean Decade actually is. There's everybody sort of gets pieces of it, and I'm going to go pretty fast because time is limited. And we want to have time for our breakouts and our discussion groups. So the ocean is big. I don't need to tell you that, right? There's a whole bunch of water in the ocean, and it's hard to sample. And so one of the more prominent researchers at Scripps, Walter Monk, this is one of his quotes. It was undersampling. The 20th century was undersampled. What does that look like? It looks like this. And this is a little bit misleading because we flatten everything temporally to make these maps. So it looks like, oh, we have enough sensors everywhere. We know everything there is. But if you look at any given year or month, it's pretty sparse. And so we do need a strategy about observing the ocean and learning about it. I have taken the long explanation of what the UN Ocean Decade is, and boiled it down to what I think the relevant parts are for this group. So you should know that it's this for sustainable development part plays a very large role. We think as people in science and engineering and technology, it's about measuring and figuring out the ocean, but then there's a huge blue ocean economy side that always comes up in everything that's anything that's UN. So we seek to stimulate the ocean science and knowledge generation. You can read that for yourself. But it provides this framework, and framework is an operative phrase here because most people think there are these programs that are going to put ships at sea, and that's not it. It's a framework, it's an idea, it's an approach, it's some great strategies to get more information and knowledge about the ocean. So we're going to develop scientific knowledge and the partnerships needed to accelerate and harness. Since I've been involved with UN Ocean Decade, I've come into contact with more commercial entities that I never knew existed that are multinational, multi-billion-dollar organizations that have ocean concerns about ocean data. And then we want to deliver science-based decision or deliver science-based solutions to achieve the 2030 agenda. The 2030 agenda is boiled down into these 17 or so goals. And I want you to start paying attention to discrete objects that are within this presentation because they're all opportunities to engage, such as life below the water, number 14. These will all end up being in the next version of the implementation plan. So what my group is involved in is providing advice on ocean data, mapping out that landscape, and seeing where there's opportunities to implement. This is something that ESET does very well. The catchphrase for the Ocean Decade is the science we need for the ocean we want. Pay attention to that for a second. So if you really want to know what the Ocean Decade is, this is what it really looks like. There are all of these sort of discrete pockets of innovation and study, convening different groups. Sometimes there's bleeding between groups, and sometimes the meetings have different players in them. But these are the major things. I don't expect you to read this. I didn't read it either. But when we start to hone in on information about the ocean, it presents an opportunity to lift all components of the digital ecosystem. You'll hear a lot about digital twin, but then we can boil it down to where the observations are, how the data is moving around the system, who ends up with what data and what tools and formats, so on and so forth. So we can use this diagram again to outline where there may be opportunities for ESET and the marine data cluster in particular to engage. So I changed the statement around the data we need for the science we want, because none of the science is going to happen without any data. I get into this. Martin Visbeck and I go back and forth. He wants to do this digital twin. We don't have enough information to make a digital twin. If we do, the ocean's going to be a lot smaller because there's just not enough information, especially in the last 5 years. So we need to get this robust data component moving, and we can with organizations like ESET and AGU. So a couple of years ago, almost coming up on a couple of years, there was a appointed group of global experts. I use the term expert very loosely, especially since I'm on it. But there are some people who really do know the lay of the land, and it has a very big European slant. That's another thing to be aware of, that there are not, the sufficient number of North Americans or South Americans or Southeast Asians, go on, especially when you get to the African continent, involved in the UN Ocean Decade. This is where we're positioned in that if we boil down that sort of very loose, sort of nebulous graph from earlier, this is where the data coordination group sits. And we're now spinning up an implementation group. So we're almost done with our work of figuring out what the whole thing looks like. And then there's going to be these opportunities to engage with the implementation group, but it's not off the ground yet. So another opportunity to engage. The data coordination group, we've developed a strategy. Version 1 is out. If you want to snap the QR code and take a look, it's a pretty involved PDF. And it has its own mission and vision, and it has particular strategic objectives. I'm going to wait till I see all the phones go down. Okay. Or satisfied faces. Okay, cool. So here are our tasks. One is a strategic plan. we're supposed to do a certain amount of gap analysis. That's not fully done yet. Our document that facilitates exchanges of information largely now has a blue economy emphasis and not enough of a science and research emphasis, in my opinion. And then advice on calls for decade action to support decade programs. So a decade program, let's take, for instance, Argo is a decade program, sanctioned, blessed, all that. Ocean Sites is not. Can't quite figure out why. You would think that the existing GOOS framework would just feed straight into it, and all those programs would be part of the UN decade, but they pick and chose. It was actually which groups spoke up. Those are the ones that became Ocean Decade programs. So again, a chance to engage if you're willing to speak up. Here's our priorities, sharing. This is something ESET does very well. All week we've been having even some very animated discussions about sharing of data. When it comes to ocean data, I don't see very many other organizations around the world that would do it any better than ESET would when it comes to data sharing, especially in and around earth science and the oceans. Improve data and discoverability. I mean, you get the idea, building trust in data and prioritizing these digital solutions, and then empowering and mobilizing global communities to advance. So these strategic priorities are in review right now. So there is an opportunity as these things sort of gel and cool to still have influence and to come in even as later players, because it is an ocean decade. It's not done yet. Just putting this up for you to read. This is something that I got from Charlie's an earlier discussion. I could tell the story about how Frank and I scared people with what the ocean decade truly was. But I thought I'd put up the broader things that's about data and places to engage, such as unlocking ocean-based solutions to climate change, expanding the global ocean observing system, and creating a digital representation of the ocean. I've spent most of my career doing these things, and I know many people in the room do as well. So you should have a little bit better idea of what the ocean decade actually is, that it is much less, it is very well organized, but much less formed in terms of something tangible than you might think. But that presents a whole bunch of opportunities. And don't be afraid of, sticking your neck out and trying an idea. If it seems like that idea is I have a musician friend who goes, if I can't think of a song that's good, I try some bad stuff all the time, and it leads to good ideas because I've removed some things off the table. All right, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was fantastic. Now everybody knows what it is and we're good to go, right? I believe Frank, you're up next. I think I need to stop sharing.
Hi, everybody. Let me see if I can share it. Let me know if you can see that.
Yep, looks good from here.
Great. Well, Steve, thank you very much. Great introduction. And see, I'm going to focus on one of the programs of the Ocean Decade and highlight additional opportunities to engage. And sort of to complement what Steve was saying, the United Nations has probably a dozen different decades going on at the same time on different flavors, be it on restoration or other type of socioeconomic issues. So the Ocean Decade, or as Steve said, is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And it's the for sustainable development that we need to link to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's just one. And so there's many opportunities to engage internationally with these things that the UN puts together. But the scary part that Steve mentioned is that it's all up to us. I mean, it is up to us to do whatever we want this decade to be. And so in this case, we're talking about marine life, and Matt invited me to talk about this one program that we call Marine Life 2030. So all of us know, Steve just mentioned that the world in general is undersampled, and we need to make decisions based on the information we got. Some of the best information we have at the moment is from the surface of the planet, and that is because we have satellites going around taking measurements of every sort. This one here is based on color reflected by the surface, and so in the ocean we call it ocean color, and we can measure things like turbidity or chlorophyll concentration that is contained in phytoplankton, and we can do that almost daily, and we've been doing it daily for nearly 25 to 30 years. So we have a pretty good record of how the surface of the planet is changing. But then the ocean is very deep. It's about 4,000 meters deep on average. And Steve mentioned there's a bunch of liters in the ocean. So it's very hard to quantify what is happening below. And if we look at the actual data that have been collected and that are open access, no? So this is the other conundrum, is how do we open access and make data accessible? This is what you get. And this is the Ocean Biodiversity Information System, or OBIS. And if you look, they have data going back over 100 years. And if you record one observation, maybe the location of one type of organism at one point in time, and you add it all together, and this is what you get. And most of the ocean is not covered. There's a lot of data around Europe and around the US. The rest of the ocean is sort of naked. And it's a problem, you know, if we want to see how things are changing and how things are changing over time. The upper right-hand side graph, it's a little bit small, but it shows kind of the number of records that are in OBIS for different years. And you see that in the last 10 years, the number of records stored in OBIS decreases significantly. And yet that's the time when our world is changing very rapidly and we have to make decisions. We know that we're seeing changes in temperature and winds and rainfall and so on, and also in the number of people using resources. And we know that this is affecting life or biodiversity that we depend on, and yet we have very bad data to look at how things are changing. And yet we're saying, you know, biodiversity is decreasing or changing, and we can see it all around us, and yet it's hard to measure on a global basis. If you go deeper in the ocean, it's even worse. These oranges near the top of these graphs and close to the white boundary there's more data near the coast, and that's logical, just because it's so difficult to sample the deep ocean. So at present, one of the problems is that there's no systematic effort internationally or even nationally to measure biodiversity. And the goal of these programs that I'm talking about today is to sort of organize ourselves and how we collect the data and manage it in a way that it flows, how it's mobilized so that people can use it and make decisions. So we've been trying to do that for a long time. So nearly 30 years now since we've been trying to organize this. Steve mentioned GOOSE, the Global Ocean Observing System, and that was formally organized under the UNESCO Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission back in the early 1990s. And they already said at that time that we needed to integrate biology into the way that we observe the planet, and especially the ocean. And well, it hasn't really happened. So in 2000, the Sloan Foundation funded a very large $600 million program for 1 decade to look at and collect as much that you could about biology in the ocean, and they called it the Census of Marine Life. Well, that ended. In 2014, the US government, working with the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO, under something called GEOBON, or the Biodiversity Observation Network, established the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, and that's called MBON. And many agencies in the US, through the National Ocean Partnership Program, and specifically NOAA, and where Matt lives, at the Integrated Ocean Observing System Program, NASA, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the Navy, they put money into this. And so there are several projects around the US that we call MBON, and they try to network and try to compare methods and collect data. So there's more of these programs coming online slowly, and the idea is to establish a network. As not all of the pieces are funded, and they don't need to be, but we want to network the conversation so that we mobilize the data. So the opportunity came in the a few years ago, Steve mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 to 2017, and the Ocean Decade was conceived and established and was announced in 2021. And under that, they made a call for programs, projects, what they call actions. And so the trick of getting involved in this Ocean Decade or the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is to respond with one of the proposals for one of these actions. And they're open all the time. And I'll talk a little bit about it at the end on how you submit. If you don't submit a proposal, you're not really part of the decade, even though we're all living in the decade. But to be called a decade program or project or activity, so quote unquote an action, you need to submit a proposal. And there's a whole bunch of programs that are listed there in red. And I'm just going to talk about Marine Life 2030 today. So Steve mentioned the structure of the decade is around these objectives, identify knowledge, generate the knowledge, increase the knowledge and use of the knowledge. And they're trying to guide that through these challenges. Marine Life 2030 addresses specifically challenge 2, which is protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity in a changing world where there are multiple stressors that ultimately are going to affect us. So they're all linked, but we try to focus on this one challenge around ecosystems and biodiversity. And so the point is that we want to use the decade as a platform. It's not funded, so it's kind of an opportunity for us to highlight under the umbrella of the United Nations that there's life in the ocean and that we benefit from it. So we better take care of it. And so how do we arrange our science to match the user needs? And so that's underlying the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network goals and the Marine Life 2030 activities is trying to connect with users so that the science and the information that is developed really addresses that and not just some curiosity of some scientist and nobody else knows about it. So how do we build the technical capacity? How do we organize data so that we can lead to forecasting about ecosystems and marine life? And that's kind of the ultimate goal. Broaden participation, bring other people in that traditionally have not been involved in how we collect information or how can we help them manage their resources. And understanding that all of this is kind of on a volunteer basis. It does lead to different funding streams, but the network itself is not funded, but it is an open network. And we want to involve all of you to the extent we can. So the idea is to collect data, establish databases on taxonomy, space and time, anything that is biological or that has to do with where life lives, so the ecology, and develop maps, look at how abundance is changing at any one point and look at trends. For that, we've organized the Global Ocean Observing System around these essential ocean variables. The essential ocean variables link with the essential climate variables that are used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for example, to make kind of a pronouncement of where we are with respect to climate, but now biology is a very big part of that. And these are the essential ocean variables for biology and ecosystems. And you can think of them as groups of organisms, but also habitats like coral, macroalgae, mangrove, seagrass. And we're constantly reviewing these and trying to develop specifications for how you measure these and then how you move the data. And so that's there's a panel under Goose that tries to do these specifications. The point of this is that you don't need just one of these essential ocean variables. You need multiple ones to understand how the planet is changing or to implement projects like restoration. Like if you plant corals in the water, is the plant successful? And you need to do that with satellites or omics technologies, acoustics, imaging all together. And the point is, how do you make the data flow in a way we can manage it and use it, especially a decision maker that is not really good at collecting all these different data streams and organizing them in a way that you can make indicators. So where's ESET in all of this? And so they roped me in to try to convince you that there is a role for ESET in helping us in the science community organize the data flow. So there's all these boxes that are kind of illustrate the different elements in the value chain for ocean observing. And you need to set the requirements, then you collect the samples with some technology. You have the raw data and you need to manage it to make it move into a database. And then you can do synthesis and modeling and deliver a product. All of these different pieces and how the data flows between these different boxes is really poorly organized. Really, there's no standards, there's no convention for biology and data sets. It's not like the meteorologists that almost 50, 60 years ago already by convention under the World Meteorological Organization decided, well, we're going to measure these six things: temperature of the air, temperature of the water, and humidity, and so on. And these are the units, and this is the way that we're going to move the data using a global telemetry system. So that they're still doing that, and it's really good. It leads to modeling of weather and forecasts that are used by everybody, and we have nothing like that in the ocean, and much less for biology. So that's where we want to go, and I think that that's where ESET can really make a big difference. So it's just about moving data. So we take the raw data, we quality control and standardize it, we move it to a host, and then we can have data views. And if all the data is standardized using formats that are well recognized and robust, then more people can do that and reuse the data over and over. So the conversation, I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's about the Ocean Decade. How can we use that platform that is very visible to convince people to use data formats? And really, that's the point, right? Engaging the different sectors from industry to academia to the government to use some of these common ways to move data. Because right now it's a wild west, and there's no way to get these cats back in the bag. So the Ocean Decade now is trying to reinvent itself, because it started in 2021. So 3 years have gone by basically, and really not much has happened, except there's a bunch of programs and a bunch of projects. All of it is disconnected. And so how do you bring even those programs and projects and activities together into something that is kind of like Steve mentioned, a digital twin of the ocean, where you can do forecasts or analysis or look at scenarios. And we're trying to organize these ideas into white papers that are going to be presented at a meeting in Barcelona in April 2024. That's the Ocean Decade Conference. That's the second one of these conferences. So to get involved, you can talk to any one of us, Steve, myself, or write a proposal for an action. There's an Ocean Decade forum. That webpage provides instructions on how to make your proposals. There's a form, you have to fill it online and you submit it. And you can develop a proposal for a program, which are big umbrella ideas where you network different projects. So there's programs, projects, activities, which are individual meetings or individual things that are shorter lived, but may have or more restricted geographically. And then you have contributions. So if you have a bunch of money and you want to donate it, that's another action. So these actions are open for submission anytime. And you can volunteer with Marine Life 2030 anytime, just writing us an email at marinelife2030 at gmail.com. So please be involved, ask us questions about to get involved. And there's, just like Marine Life 2030, there's other programs that you can look at and get involved just as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I love the graphic that was developed for that. That's pretty amazing. Okay, and our next presenter is Kate, and I need to pull up your slides. Here's the slides and let's get Zoom figured out here. One and two. You need the notes.
I actually don't think I do because I'm just married. I forgot that I can see the slides.
Perfect. Are we good?
I guess.
Yeah. Does this go away, the little box?
Recording.
If you press more.
More. Hide. Up. There we go. All right, perfect. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Kate Rose. I'm with the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information, but I'm actually with their cooperative institute, the Northern Gulf Institute at Mississippi State University. And I am a recent applicant to the UN Ocean Decades and to a UN Ocean Decade program. And so I just kind of wanted to share with everybody like my impressions on my process that I went through, because I likewise wish that we had had this session perhaps before I went through that application process, and I would have had a much better understanding of the whole big picture. I have mostly, of course, been aware that this is going on, but not quite, I suppose, the nuts and bolts and how all these different components kind of break down, because it is very involved. There's a lot to see. So and that was the down button, right? Soon hit it hard on.
Oh dear.
There you go. So my work, I work with on a project called CMEX, which is the Coastal and Marine Ecological Classification Standard, which a lot of people may already know about, but basically, I'll talk about that in a little minute, but the way that I got involved with this is because one of our sort of partners in our community of practice or implementation group that we have leads the NOAA IOCM, which is the interagency or the ocean and coastal mapping team. And that's a part of the broader interagency working group on ocean and coastal mapping that has members from NSF and all the different federal agencies. And every year they propose a couple of projects to Ocean Decade. I didn't really know about that, at the time, but they came to me or to us and said, would you like to propose? You've got all this work going on with CMEX. We think it'd be great for Ocean Decade. Would you like to submit it as a project? And we said, sure. And so within NOAA, and I suppose with the other federal agencies as well, we don't submit directly through the form that Frank had just shown you. We have to submit and go through this internal NOAA process. I've got a linked to the website that describes that. But then they submit that through the NAS, the US NAS US National Committee. And so I actually just a couple of weeks ago submitted all of my application to them, and that takes a little bit of time. But I think that the actual form that Frank had shown there's an August 1st deadline. So I just had to do my stuff a little bit ahead of time and give a lot of other people a chance to look at it and vet it and make sure if they had any questions. But basically, my process and, the information that they were asking for me was just, there's a set of criteria that I'll sort of show later that they wanted us to meet, and, just do your basic things like identify, how your project's relevant to Ocean Decade objectives and the program priorities. So you do have to dive into those websites and kind of take a look around and see what those are so that you can meet them. And then to also identify how your proposed decade action will contribute to the UN Ocean Decade. And so something when we had a planning call last week, and Steve, you didn't mention this morning, but you said that this is a give, not a get. So you do. And throughout this process and the questions that I was asked in my proposal was, how are you contributing? Like, what does your work do for this? And how can you help bring this together? Right. And so, we also had to do things like identify expected outcomes and key activities and, how your project aligns with other work that is already programs that are already there happening within the UN Ocean Decade program that you're applying to. And I did sort of swipe this little graphic here because this was sort of helpful for me to kind of understand the language as well. This came from a presentation from the NAS that they showed, which just gives you this overarching sort of structure of decade actions can be any of these programs, projects, contributions, or activities that Frank also mentioned there, but that's kind of the structure of the hierarchy of how those things are organized, which can be helpful to understand when you're reading through all those documents. And so CMEX is basically, it's a thesaurus of defined terms, which we call ecological units, and they're used for annotating observational data in coastal and marine and lacustrine ecosystems, habitats. And it was, took about a decade worth of development time by a group of people from across different agencies and with the nonprofit NatureServe. And it builds on existing classifications and approaches. And it's really constructed to be able to allow people to synthesize observational data into descriptive single units, referred to as like a biotope, right? So you can bring together all the different aspects of an environmental, the abiotic and biotic components of an ecosystem together and tie them together into even broader, like global sort of and regional spatial units under these aquatic settings and biogeographic settings and things like that. It's technology agnostic and scale independent. So you can describe data that is broad from, satellite imagery to graph samples. And it really is a single scheme that unites data from data and information from like the coastal zone all the way down to the deep ocean. And then we also sort of align with terrestrial classification standards like the wetland standard and the US National Vegetation Classification. And it was developed really to support all the goals of the US national data, spatial data infrastructure. And so it was endorsed by the FGDC in 2012 as a federal ecological classification standard. So that's a little bit of the background on that. And so it's a really great product, and it's a really great service to have to be able to work with data once you have it. And so, as I said, it was endorsed in 2012 and it was published as a PDF, and we have some spreadsheets. At one point, there was a web tool where you could search and look up terms, but that's been decommissioned. But so we've, in the past couple of years, really instigated this update process because CMEX was designed to be updated because, we gain scientific knowledge over time. We have new technologies that we need to sort of adopt or adapt to. So we've been going through this update process. And so when I started going through this update process, we're meeting with subject matter experts and with our user community, really, who have come to us and said, oh, this doesn't work for me. I don't understand this. Like, we should change this. And so we've been doing that, and I have come to ESET to help me understand how to turn this into, a digital resource that we can track really rigorously, and so on and so forth. And so the ESET semantic clusters have been really helpful for me in learning how to do this. And so this is all work that's kind of underway anyway. So I have our actions over here in these colored boxes. So this content update is, just the work of, talking with the subject matter experts and crafting the changes that we want to make. But then there's also this technological transformation that we're working on as well. And so to do all these ESET things that we like to do, which are also going to be incredibly helpful for the UN Ocean Decade and for being able to communicate and bring together and synthesize information, right? So, make sure that our vocabulary is, fair, and then also to be able to be interoperable, so we can connect with other thesauri and classification schemes like that are actually, things like worms and opus and so forth. And so this is all work that we really want to do. And so these actually connect to a few of those different decade action criteria that I identified in my application there as well. And I'm not going to read through those, but so it's just trying to show you the way that, work that you may already be doing probably already has a place or does fit some action. And, then also, I'm just putting up here the different objectives that I think that we're applying for. So the decade objective 2, to build capacity and generate comprehensive knowledge and so forth. And so again, I'm not going to read through all those, but those are just like the larger goals from the UN Ocean Decade that you can look up there as well and see where you fit in. And actually, to go and like look at the various different programs that are accepting applications, and the programs sort of identify what objectives and challenges that they're working with, but it kind of helps you see then again how your work might coordinate with these. And so I was able to, or one requirement was to distill all of this down into a simple kind of statement that could be like shared with other, on websites and promotional materials and things like that for the Ocean Decade. So it just kind of distilled all this stuff down to, essentially, I think that like we plan to apply to the Marine Life 2030 program. So this is a little bit of a pitch for Frank, I guess, but he seems pretty open to anything. So the Marine Life 2030 program, which I think would be really great to be a part of this like network of networks and to be a node within like all of these different resources that could connect together, and to have a framework and a platform where that would accelerate that. That work is really hard to do because we're all really busy being focused, on our different projects, but to have some way to be able to bring all these together and help us, kind of move forward together would be great. And there are also very strong connections with the Ocean Data 2030 program, but I put that in dashed lines because I'll tell you, like this process, there are a lot of things that I'm not really sure about. And it didn't seem to me in looking at like the materials that Ocean Data 2030 was accepting projects this year, but maybe they are, I don't know. Either way, we have connections there as well. And so we'll probably end up doing some, sort of coordinating with those guys too. But yeah, so I guess my central pitch is that CEMEX has a unique role, and it could be, part of this node in the network of networks, because there are already programs there, as Frank mentioned, such as OBIS, that CEMEX actually provides you the context for your for marine life, right? So being able to describe ecosystems in the standard way, so that we're all sort of understanding exactly what we need, when we're analyzing our data. And so, yeah, I think just going back to it's a give, not a get. I mean, it's very clear there's no funding attached to this, right? So, but for us, our project, CEMEX, I'm base funded for the work that I do. I don't have, any external funding coming in, and then it's all voluntary work between myself and a group of people with OCM and the people within our implementation group or community of practice. All of our subject matter experts and users who are coming together to help us craft these other, changes and so forth are all just doing it voluntarily and sneaking it into, your regular work as you do. But, this kind of justifies it. So I think it will be beneficial for us overall in that way as well. And it also will broaden the awareness of CEMEX. And, hopefully, if that's not something that people want to use, it might kind of give them some ideas about how to organize information and synthesize and so forth. So yeah, we're looking forward to a lot of these opportunities to learn and to be able to collaborate with people and leverage existing work and contributions wherever possible, because all of this takes a lot of effort and we should be working together at it. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Kate. All right. So here we go. All right. So we brought in Kate and Frank and Steve just to give you an idea of some of the activities that we've heard of within the ESET community. But we've also dropped a couple of additional resources into the notes document for this session. So there are other activities going on. This isn't the few select that we chose. This is just a couple. For example, the Deep Ocean Observing Strategy is highly engaged with the Ocean Decade as well. So So there's a lot of different ESET pieces that are already touching into this. And so what we're going to go into now is more of a discussion. And so I was going to open it up for Steve to maybe spark some inspiration on like, what are the opportunity space that you see specifically for like the ESET community, and we're going to go into a discussion session on how folks see ESET actually joining into these conversations and things. So I was going to, can I punt it off to you, Steve? Oh yeah, Frank.
Yeah, well, first, Kate, that was a great talk. Thank you. But Matt, can you stop sharing the presentation?
Yep.
Thank you.
You muted yourself if you were planning on talking.
No, I just wanted to see if anybody else had video on.
Oh, okay. So yeah, what we're really trying to see is like, what are the opportunity space that you specifically see for ESET's community of practitioners? And so, yeah, do you want to go ahead?
So I think Frank and Kate brought up some additional opportunities in detail, but I think that you're getting the gist of that there are multiple opportunities and there's things that ESET does very, very well. And I'd say this all the time, no matter where I go, I say there's nothing like ESET anywhere else in the world where, you know, these groups form and they actually solve problems. And I know that there are other organizations such as CODATA and RDA, but ESET, when it comes down to people who actually are close to different data sources, knowing how to move them around the system and knowing and are being close to the researchers, that is something, these opportunities are custom made for ESET and the clusters, especially the marine data cluster in this case. So one of the things that we do particularly well is that we are really very well, we are very familiar with standards and those standards needing to be implemented. As Frank said, even in the, you know, there's a sort of a declining adherence to standards as you go through chemical, physical, and biological oceanography. But all of these three major fields need help, and especially with the ocean decade, what people don't, the discussions that we aren't having are at the format level, at the data transport level. And that is something that the Marine Data Cluster and people in ESET know particularly well and can, you know, actually chart a solution. I mean, Doug Fells is sitting right here, and I know that lots of the landing pages with schema.org and Science on Schema that the work that he and Adam Shepard have done would be particularly useful to the Ocean Decade, but we never get to that technical level. So like I said, that technical group is still forming, but they're batting around names and it really isn't finalized quite yet. And so, yeah, Doug. And I think, do we need to get a microphone for the online people? Sorry.
Go on, Steve.
I'm pretty much done.
Oh.
Those are just words falling on me now.
So, hello, everyone. My name is Doug Fells. I'm with the Ronan Institute. I'm actually with the Ocean Info Hub project as well, which is part of the UN Ocean Decade, as Kate mentioned. And I just wanted to express a few connections that already kind of exist. We want to be able to leverage along these lines. So Ocean Info Hub is basically doing the same thing that we did, Adam and I did with the NSF work there with ocean partners within the UN. So we have about 24 or so that we're currently working with, about 18 or so that we're currently indexing into a knowledge graph and expressing that information already. So there's a connection then also there between what we're doing in that work and the existing schema.org cluster within ESET, right? So we're following the guidance there for type data set, and then we're expanding that out from that area as well. And so we have a graph that we've created, oceaninfohub.org. If you want to see it, there's a search interface there, and there's also a GitHub repository where we have some of the initial work that we're doing. Would love to get involved, right, in that, to learn more about how can we work with data integration, What can we do in terms of our ways that we're expressing those things? Get people exercising the graph, right? The graph can be downloaded now. I can give you information on how to get to that graph and how to download it. You could start inspecting the distributions and the actual data sets that are in there and start looking at some of those things. So I do think there are some real kind of near-term things that we can start doing within ESET and then use that to kind of feed back into ways people want to connect into the ocean decade writ large, right? And I'm more than happy to talk about that at length.
great.
Probably longer than you want me to. So.
Yeah, they say a helicopter is 10,000 parts flying in a tight formation. And the important part there is that they know about each other. And I think that the ocean data movement around the world is 10,000 parts, but not in a tight formation. And we're all moving independently, sometimes overlapping work. And I think when it comes, this opportunity with the Ocean Decade provides us with a chance to consolidate it for a particular purpose in a finite amount of time. And so we fill it in with what we need, but we, excuse me, in this room, and it just chokes me up to think about that, have all of these answers. If we don't engage, then these answers won't come to the fore, and what will result in the implementation plan will be, you know, the lesser for it. Excuse me.
Hi, this is Jonathan Blythe, BOEM. And I get more excited when I hear presentations like Kate Rose and talking about a particular effort. CMEX is something that's really important to BOEM. And one of our data people in BOEM is leading the standard ocean mapping protocols, an interagency effort. And she's very interested in working with CMEX and making it easier to use and implement. So I see some good alignment there. You must be talking to them already.
Is it, Laura?
Laura Turner.
Yeah, she's actually a member of our education group. So yeah, you know Laura.
Laura, yeah. So she presented to the National Academy of Sciences on how on our annual funding call, and so there might be funding coming soon. But yeah, so but then I get lost when we talk about the Ocean Decade. So I'd like to focus, and that makes it more concrete for me.
I see Frank has his hand raised. Frank, do you want to go ahead?
Oh. Okay. Steve and I have talked a little bit about how do you look beyond 2030 and have a long-term view of I think that the idea of doing something immediately is really important, and highlighting and converging on standards it could be done now. But how do you get a new generation of people that actually uses those standards in their work is maybe not that easy. And so Steve and I have thought about how do you bring this into the way that we train ourselves and our community or people that use data in a way that can have a long-term impact or lasting use. And so that I think that can only come through education programs that internalize the idea of standards and units and conventions into a formal education process, and then spills out into an informal education process also. And right now, I mean, when I went through school at the undergraduate level, I mean, even before, but especially even at the graduate level, we never talked about standards in biology, but there were standards in the physical side of things with very clearly defined units and data formats and so on. Data formats have been maturing, and yet the biologists are not really imbibed in using those. So how do you bring that into a whole new generation? And to me, is to develop curricula and lesson plans that can then be internalized into oceanography programs formally, and promote the idea of, well, if you do this, then you can use more data, you can, all of the benefits are, all of you know about it, but my concern is that we don't organize in a way that the people are educated about using this, then it'll still continue to be a haphazard thing.
Abby?
Is this on? Okay. Hey, thanks, Frank, because you set up the next session so perfectly. We're still in this one, but that's what we're going to talk about in the next session in this room. So come to that if you have ideas.
Thank you, Abby. So as you can see, there's a lot of ideas sparking. There's a lot of good potential areas for collaboration. And so I think Charlie is going to lead us in a little bit of groupthink and ideation is what we're calling this.
Yeah, so in a moment, this originally, Matt and Carolina said, we want to understand this more, but as we were forming the session, it came out like, is there any kind of call for proposal for action from ESET? And we want to kind of explore ideas today. So first of all, in a moment, we're going to put you into breakouts of like little small group discussions to ideate on this, and like 4 or 5 people. Oh yeah, thank you. But first it's like, locate yourself in one of these, the 10 challenges. Like, where do you see just take a moment and think about, where do you see your work fitting into the ocean decade and these 10 challenges?
We're almost there. Sorry.
Looks like that's good for the brain, I think. Like this early in the morning, Yeah, so just take a moment and think about, like, where does your work fit into this? How might your work fit in? Okay, now take a moment and think about, like, if knowing what you know about the work at ESET and others are doing and what you've heard, like, what ideas are springing to mind about how you might combine your work that's happening here in some multidisciplinary way? How might you come together to address these multidisciplinary challenges for the ocean decade? Like, what ideas are brewing? And we're going to start sharing. Like, no one's going to probably come out with, I got the idea, but maybe you got part of an idea. And when you share it with someone else, you can build on that. Like, is there a place for the marine data cluster to be a liaison for some of these ideas? So just take a moment to think about that. Okay, so what we're going to do is form small groups. We're going to do this online also. Form small groups of 4 or 5 people. We're going to take turns sharing any idea or pieces of ideas that you've come up with. And then as you're listening to each other, see if you can riff off of each other, build upon what you're hearing, and see if we can come up with, like, each small group, like 1, 2 plausible ideas that might emerge. Okay, and so in the notes document, we're running a little bit short on time, but in the notes document you can get to through Sketch. There's a place at the bottom of the notes document that we can start typing in some of these ideas in case we don't get to hear from them in the report outs. Go ahead and form your small groups. And this is the question I just asked you to ponder. That's what you're going to be responded to in your small groups. So in your tables, just get together and start sharing your ideas. I would tell you, you'll have about 12.
There we go. So we're going to mute the microphone.
Ideas have you been talking about? Matt, you've got the microphone, right?
Hey,
Carolina?
I'm glad everybody's having a great conversation. We're running a little bit low on time, so I'd like to, if we could, do some report outs from each of the groups as to what kind of conversations you were having, what kind of ideas are spurring, and kind of what first steps are being thought of. So Carolina, you have the mic. Who wants to go first? Who's excited? I know Doug's excited.
Are you gonna do it?
So we maybe didn't come up. Denise Hills, Advanced Resources International and Ronan Institute. Thank you for reminding me. It's morning. I haven't had enough coffee. So I'm going to let Doug talk about more of the solution side of things, but we actually came up with some questions that we kind of want answered. Like how do we know that we've had success? Like what are we doing gets to one particular goal? And also, sometimes I think we're technologists here for the most part, and we love that stuff, but who's using this and how are they going to use it? And let's keep that in mind first and foremost, because there is no, if you build it, they will come. It's not a given. So now I'm going to pass it off to Doug for like the actual stuff we talked about.
I don't know if I have anything more to add to that. But I mean, I think there's a good point here, right? Is that especially even OIH is very cognizant of the fact that it's kind of like we're building a technological approach, and we had some motivation for that. But one of the concerns I have with OIH and some of the projects we've done in the past is that when you start collecting all this information and saying like, we're going to build a search interface for it, you're competing against people who do search really, really well at scale, right? And so what we've really been trying to focus on is how can we get other types of engagement with that, and express a graph or just a data corpus that other people can use locally. Their portals, they can do data science, they can do analytics, all these kind of things on it. And then Andrea brought up a really good point of we need to start engaging though with our communities and trying to get those use cases defined that help drive the use of that data, what data we need and how we need it formatted. And if we could connect some of that concept with some of the points and some of the activities that take place in the various clusters within ESET, then you might be able to get a kind of a coherent, discussion points and discussion topics about how we organize and move forward on different standards, on different implementations, on different social problems, on different assessments, things like that. So that did not help, I know.
This idea for number 9, skills and technology for all. So I'm with NOAA, and since 2018, NOAA has been sending me to India as for capacity building with our partner Ministry for Sciences. I've been doing training courses in data science skills. And so this September, I am partnering with the Indian National Center for Information Services that has a big training center for operational oceanography. And we've been wanting to run a hack week. I've been involved with hack weeks with ESET 2 and with SNOW-X, and we'll be involved with the Ocean Hack Week. I've seen how these kind of hack weeks have transformed the skills within the cryosphere community and really transformed the kinds of science that they can do by giving just your regular snow scientists the skills to work with remote sensing data and ask really different questions. So I've watched that. I've seen how that's changed, and that's what we're trying to do in India. So we have funding for this first hack week. And my challenge is, how do we get funding for hack week number 2? Right. And 3 and 4? How do we make this a self-sustaining thing? Because India doesn't have the money for it, and NOAA only pays my salary.
Right.
Is there, yeah, they are part of the, yes, the training center is part of the UN Decade of the Ocean, something. I'm pretty sure they are one of those things in there.
And see, just that connection right there of like, is this effort involved in the ocean deck? I think it is, maybe it is, like that. I feel like that's a space that we need to clear out as well, as like, where are these connections and how are we already engaging in this? Like, I don't, sorry, I just. Anybody else? Any other groups?
I am Steve Formel from USGS. So our group kicked around two ideas, didn't come up with any great solutions, but one of them applies to sort of everything, which is maybe we're ready to start going after more historical data for the purposes of forecasting on, you know, and building on all the modern and mature data types we have now. You know, often going after those old data are seen as just really expensive projects, but maybe, you know, maybe we spend some time like focusing on it, we could come up with some good solutions to you know, pull out some of that data and have it be useful for all of these challenges. And then the other one was, again, not really a solution, but sort of relates to number two, protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity, which is, you know, and I know there's people in this room who we've had lots of conversations about biodiversity in the ocean and global biodiversity, and how do we assess that and make useful metrics and maps and things like that. And we always run into the problems of sort of sparse data, biased sampling. And so far, nobody's found that silver bullet to, you know, take it to the next level of actually creating really useful products. So I think that's just one maybe facet to number two that we could work on and think about.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so we kind of had an unusual conversation, but I feel like the first group, I really liked what you said, Denise, about like who's going to use this and what are they going to use it for. So if you ask, let's say pie in the sky, we want to get to a point where we can ask questions like, what would happen to this species if that species disappeared, or what would like if we're seeing maybe harmful algal blooms somewhere, what is causing that? Or how do we go from like a mutation in a gene in an organism, and how does that affect some sort of larger ecological process? And I realize that's totally pie in the sky, and we have a lot of models that could potentially do this. But I think that starting from a point of some very basic data modeling would help us get to a point where we could have a system that would be, I guess, like kind of like a digital twin, but would be sort of like a graph-based thing that you could actually ask questions and get back some answers, similar to some of the projects that I've been working on with in my other hat, where you might ask something like, what drug might we be able to repurpose to treat this disease, or something of that nature. So you're using the power of the graph, like the inferencing and the logic modeling, to create new knowledge. But you can only do that when you're pulling together lots of heterogeneous data that wasn't already together. And I'm going to stop before I sound totally crazy.
I think Danny had a comment back there. Yeah.
So I'm going to loop it back around to this conversation here, sort of who's using this and what. We all come to ESET personally because we're contributing to something that we benefit from, right? We're volunteering in these clusters and promoting schema.org, but we internally, we benefit from the fruits of our labors coming to ESET. So I guess my question to this group is like, what are we benefiting? How are we benefiting? So Kate gave a great, it's a give, not a get, but it is a get in some way. Everybody has their personal get because she's getting CMIX more broadly used and integrated and promoted. And we come to ESET and we get something out of our contributions to ESET. So it's a give and a get back. So what is our get back out of collaborating together to push something to the UN decade. And then that follow on is, I don't see the infrastructure, like what this group is talking about. I don't see the infrastructure, how do we get from point A to solving AND's number 9 or whatever that is. So there's a gap in how do we see the fruits of our labor going to supporting the UN decades challenges and achieving those goals.
Right. I think Steve might have some.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Few things give me more joy than arguing, Danny, in public. So the give is almost a peer give, but I think in the reason that we don't have that infrastructure, Danny, is because we never gave at the highest level that would build that infrastructure. This is an opportunity to go in so high and with such high visibility that we will normalize the types of priorities that we have coming out of this group. We don't have that opportunity otherwise. So this is that opportunity, but it doesn't pay off in short time scales. This is going to pay off in decades, century-long time scales.
You're saying you contribute the infrastructure, not to product that achieves the goal.
Well, this is an opportunity to contribute. And I think Frank brought this up the other day. Yeah, the ocean decade is 2020 to 2030 ostensibly, but really it's much longer than that. There are discussions that are happening in Ocean Decade Group that go out to 2050, 2070, so on and so forth. If we start getting people to do where Ann ended up, and I thought it was a good point, I don't know why you stopped, bringing together these disparate data sources and being able to just ask something. Hey, are there magnesium or manganese samples in the Baltic Sea? And an answer comes back like that with usable data, and that's normal. That's the future we want. I know.
There's a gap in our contribution and then getting to what you're talking about. So so say we work on this. How is it getting coordinated and produced and managed and stewarded for beyond 2030? Where's the infrastructure at the UN decade level that's going to take the graph, take OIH and
So I also want to give the people online a chance to hop
To
in.
give somebody else. As I walk the mic forward to give it to Ann, I'm going to say the phrase you've always heard, we're the ones we've been waiting for. We're going to build it. We just have to put ourselves in a position to do it.
I think we're all in violent agreement, but I just want to say for the record, you can ask the question, what disease might treat this disease or what drug might treat this disease? And people have been helped in that way. So it works, but it has taken 20+ years to build all of that data infrastructure. And I'm not just talking about databases and collecting data. I'm talking about having machine readable representations of what is a gene, what is a disease, what is a phenotype, and how do all these things fit together, and the building of all the standards that go along with that. And so you're right, Steve, it does. I don't know if it's going to take centuries, but it's definitely going to take decades.
So I think Frank had some comments online, and then I want to wrap it up. We are just at the top of the end of the session.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of opportunity for ESET to do something, and maybe the people that are really familiar with data and data schema and how and who blesses a specific data format or data formatting standard. And I'm not quite clear on that. I know there's ISO and there used to be FGDC, and I don't know how involved they are anymore. But at the international level, who does that? The Ocean Decade is a fleeting thing. It just provides us a temporary platform to make a bunch of noise, and so we should use that. But I don't think that we should expect the Ocean Decade or the UN to be the managers of our lives. And I hope we don't go that way either. I think that there are other organisms that we can use more effectively, and ESET may be one, to help promote these standards, bless standards, or, and it's also associated with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, something called the Ocean Best Practices System. And so they have proposed that there should be some way to endorse a practice or a standard operating practice. And, you know, you can go through the GOOS or you can go through any one of the international or national bodies to develop a specific approach to doing something. But I think that we have not done that with data, and ESET can move into that vacuum and say, well, we're going to work with the international community and we're going to work on developing the standards. I know Abby and Matt are very involved with several of you in the group on doing this for biology, not just for the ocean, but all of biology. And so what are the standards? What are the databases? How do you mobilize things in a way that we can? And so ESET could take that mantle and say, well, we're here to help, you know, and somebody said, well, what do you get back? You get back the idea that you're the endorser.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, we are at 9:32. Everyone needs coffee. The last thing I would say is anybody interested in an unconference session on this topic? Because we can throw something on there and hopefully make something happen, but want to put feelers out. Okay, I will leave it there. So yeah, keep an eye on the marine data cluster. Hopefully we'll have more conversations. We'll help out take this somewhere. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to the speakers. Really appreciate it.